Hello and welcome back to a fucking rare episode of the Backseat Climbing Podcast. It has been quite some time, I'll be completely honest with you. I actually did have an episode that I recorded, I was going to upload, it was all ready to go, but then I just never did. I didn't think it was very good, and you kind of like get down into that spiral with yourself, I suppose, where you're not sure things are good enough. I've also been pretty fucking busy. I'm at university. Although I have just done the entire summer, I did quite a lot of climbing though. I went to North Wales and the Lake District a good few times, and just been living life. Also, like, kind of, don't know, taking like a little bit of like a step back from the whole like climbing internet shit. There's been a fair amount of controversy with individuals lately, pretty serious allegations, and I don't really want to touch on a majority of that stuff. I think that's for somebody else to do. But I think at the moment, and what inspired me to come back, is the sheer downfall of quite a few climbing podcasts that are currently taking place. I'd just like to let people know I don't really intend on interviewing people. I don't really intend on monetizing this podcast or talking about politics in literally any capacity. I'm just going to basically autistically talk about grades in this episode. In, I suppose, other news, it's been pretty fucking disgusting in this country, the UK, for a little while. It's actually been dry, but it's been like Floridian humidity, so you can't get outside on the grit unless you're like a fucking madman. But yeah, there we go. I guess we should probably just dive straight into this one. Today we're going to be talking about grades. Now, grades as a topic, I think, has like a lot of elements to it, and it's quite funny because I think in terms of things that are ever discussed in climbing, like in like intensively, I think grades are probably number one. Like, they're such a contentious topic, and like I think a lot of people put like a lot of themselves into the grade of a climb, and it kind of makes sense because fundamentally, for often the grade represents the difficulty, and to a lot of people that fundamentally equals like the effort that they have put in to do something. And I think like when you consider that, like, it does make sense, and I'm sure everybody's had that, like when you put like loads of time into something, you think it's really difficult, and then somebody's like, oh, I think it's easy, or it's like easier than you think it is. Like, it hurts your ego a bit. I think that's only natural. And I suppose the like most relevantly recently, the biggest grade based discussion would probably be the indoor versus outdoor argument. Firstly, I think I should firstly consider this. So the other day, I was had some friends around. I was at one of my mates' houses rather, and we were watching the new Wedge video with Dan Varian, Aidan Roberts, Keenan Takashi, and Katie Lamb in Fairhead, which is an absolutely excellent watch. Sam Lawson always cooks up an absolute storm with those ones. Yeah, like really cool, like developing these boulders, like rock climbing on this like super incredible environment. And then immediately after, we watched the new Magnus Mitbo video where he takes this like a classic gym YouTuber to Parthian in London, and it's like his first time climbing. And I kind of said after that, like, and I've thought this for quite some time, it's like these two activities are completely different from one another. They are like totally separate. In one, you're watching like development of rocks with a really weird movement style where the outcome of the day isn't necessarily about topping it, it's about like further developing, and you'll spend more time cleaning and building landings in Fairhead than you will actually climbing. And when considering that, I think it's quite amusing that we have this idea and continue to perpetuate this idea that the difficulty of that should be represented like equally, in the sense that we use Waco grades for both indoors and outdoors. And I'm not saying that just because you've got to do some cleaning and a bit more walking that it should be any harder. I'm actively against that. There's like been cases I know in Colorado of people giving like hard grades to things just because the walk is like 4 hours long. And I'm actually not talking about box therapy there. I've heard about this V8 that wasn't really V8, but I just think kind of really fucking hard walking. And I don't think that should be the case, because like obviously strategy changes, doesn't it? And stuff like that, and I think those two things should be remained separate. Otherwise, you go into this like landslide of like what if grades. If somewhere's like really expensive to visit, for example, does it get a harder grade because you need to like grind out your job a bit longer to do it? But I think, going back to the original point, I think it's we often, and this argument is like, I think, becoming weaker because we're seeing a lot of gyms lately who just don't fucking grade at all with like traditional grades, which I think is good. Like, we, of course, famously the Hang gym in London uses like chilies, like spice levels, which I think is quite a novel idea. And the Hanger franchise in the UK also does that. And I'm aware of other places in America that also do that. And I think it's like, I think more and more like the stereotype of outdoor climbing being really hard is kind of like perpetuating itself. But I don't necessarily think outdoor climbing is hard. It's just uncomfortable, right? I think Drew Ruana said this, where he's like, outdoor climbing like isn't nice. Like, all the holds are generally sharp and pretty grim. You have to go out when it's fucking freezing if you want to do anything hard and whatnot. Like, it's not nice to do, whereas indoor climbing like is. Everything's like bright colours and whatnot. It's just a big like transfer of skills which don't really exist. And I think as well, to another thing that I think often people miss the point in is that doesn't mean like indoor climbing everywhere is harder. I would go on the record to say that dynos are something that is often overlooked as like a thing that indoor climbing has made significantly easier. Like, there's a lot of like really like hard like dynos that are fairly basic movement patterns outside, because that's not traditionally a skill that like outdoor climbers and traditional outdoor climbers would have. But in the same way that like horrible 6B sandstone slabs are also not a skill that indoor climbers have, that's why they're perceived as harder. And I think that's why also that like really physical boulders and more board style boulders are starting to like become seemingly easier, because it's way easier to train, and there's a lot more people who are used to the movement patterns of more physical and board style boulders than there are like really technical styles. And it's like slightly incomparable in that way. And I think one thing is, though, like, there's often an ideology which I think is sold in climbing predominantly by like standardized training and coaching companies, like, i.e. Lattice, really. And it's that if you do like fucking 6 months of work grinding in like the gym, doing loads of like antag exercises, you'll get better at outdoor bouldering. And it's like, nah. Like, fundamentally, I think so often do we miss the point that climbing is a movement based exercise. Like, it's not like, yes, stats are really good, and like to be able to do 200% body weight hang is like probably will help you with that, like, climbing, and I'm not doubting that. But I feel like we often miss the point that it's 50% movement based, even more so movement based. Like, if you can't move, like, you won't be able to climb. Like, I think so often we're sold this idea that if you just get really, really strong and then just go outside, like, you'll just do all your projects and you'll be better at climbing. And I don't really think that is the case. Like, so often do you see people that are just insanely strong but don't know how to move, and I'd say that's more common than somebody that knows how to move really well and is weaker. I think if I had to choose, I'd rather be somebody that moves really well but weak, because there's so much more knowledge about how to get strong than like, okay, improve your movement, and the Just Climb moniker is one of them. I'd say, like, most evidently, like, you won't get better at outdoor climbing unless you go outdoor climbing, and it's something that I talk about like a lot. And as well as this, like, between these kind of indoor and outdoor things, there's so much that like is really emphasized indoor, but then is just like seemingly doesn't exist outdoor. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing until it gets sold onto like training boards. The one thing which I've always, and like most recently, been thinking of a fair bit about is how prolific pinchers have become on indoor training boards and just indoors, like, in general. Pinches don't really exist like outdoors all that much, at least in the UK. And I'm aware that in like Rocklands and parts of like that river washed granite you get in places like Brione, there are these pinches that come out from the wall. But in the UK, they are pretty fucking rare. Like, I think most evidently, like, the climbs that contain a pinch are really often called the Pinch. For example, there's one in North Wales, there's one at Crag X. Like, there's so many of these, like when have you ever heard a climb called the Crimp? Because they are actually really common, and yet pinches have become something that is like a namesake within like climbing and training. Is that like you got to get your like pinch block exercise up, and I've talked about this as well. And one of my friends came up with like a good reason for why, and it's like when you actually think about picking up anything, you do it with your thumb. So like as like people that are newer to indoor climbing come in, they're like, oh fuck, like I really want to do something with my thumb here, like I need a place to put it. And as well as that, so often within outdoor climbing, we have the holds are like set into the wall. Like rarely on rock types you get holds that are like physical features of the rock, and when they do, they're like truly like impressive features. Like the Pro Touch Traverse in Brione comes to mind as like a feature that ripples out from the wall. They're often set in, and because of that, like your thumb is less useful. Whereas without indoor climbing, obviously all the holds are just bolted to the fucking wall. So like quite often you do have your thumb like has to do something with that, unless it's like a big macro. Or often we see like half dual text holds, like the Cheetah Crimps, or is it, sorry, maybe the flat hold Crimps. I think both of them actually have that, to be fair, like the big dual text line on the bottom to like, so you can get less out of your thumb. And I think like back to the grades argument of that like perpetuates itself, doesn't it? If like why like the grading is different, and it's not just because like, okay, the style is different, yeah, but well, like why is the style different? And it fundamentally it's because they want to make like indoor climbing like enjoyable. Like if it just represented outdoor climbing, it would be pretty horrible. And I think that's why those differences exist. But then to keep going with that, you also have gyms that like really do set hard in like this like unique sort of style, and famously we have the B pump gyms. I think recently we're seeing Ryuchi on Alphane, and somebody commented being like, what, this would be like a fucking green tape in B pump. I don't know what the tapes mean, I know black is the hardest. And he was like, yeah, like actually, like it does feel like that, which is unbelievable to think about. I know like some of these like pro climbers have done like singular like black tape climbs. I know Sean Bailey lived in Japan for quite a while with Miho, and he said he did like his first black tape after being there for like a few months, which is unbelievable, because this guy's like, I mean, potentially if the Trieste project gets V17 done, like 9 Boulder, which is like pretty incredible to think that somebody can set that high. And then I suppose most notoriously within things that are set that are generally done really hard indoors, you have boards, and this is something with like tremendous like specific style involved with it. I mean, I think often something like the Moonboard is seen as sandbagged, and I would actually disagree. The Moonboard is just a really specific style, right? Like there's guys that are fucking amazing on the Moonboard, like Ravioli and Hosok, but when you watch those guys climb, they've like mastered it. They like describe the like width between the holds in like columns of holds, because like they know how far they can move with all of these. Like the way Hosok climbs is like, I mean, like he's some sort of horrible amputee with no legs. Like he is so like light on his hands, and you can like flick around with the way he's training. And I think he's just like sort of engineered his body to operate in that style, and like that's just like that's just the way he climbs, and that's like the style in which the Moonboard is based in. I think it's less obvious because a lot of gyms now use like the same sets of holds or set in like a similar physical style because route setters are transferred. And so people go from gym to gym being like, okay. But then when they hop on something as stark on the as the Moonboard, which is in such a specific, like fully engineered, like echo chamber style, it's going to feel like really hard. And I think that can be said for a lot of boards, whether that's just like a one-off standardized board or something that's been like fully like has like a full international community around it, like develops its own style. I was listening to the Test Piece podcast the other day, which is actually a good podcast. I've only listened to a handful of them, but with Ethan Salvo on, and he talked about like the style in Squamish being like really really difficult to wrap your head around, and he likes it because of like different things, and he's not too focused on the grade. But he likes how like hard, and he described it as like the first time you get on a moon board, you're like, oh, this style is like really weird, like this feels sandbagged. But like when you master the moon board, you're like, oh, this like isn't that bad. And I think that often happens with developed rock areas, and I think the same can be said like within the grit, to be honest. Like the way like we've like there's 6B grit slabs that like there would be like indoor, like there'd be pros that like couldn't do them. They are fucked. Like when Ondra flashed the ace, I think that's maybe the only 8B on grit you could flash, because it's like rarely like a basic style. And I think like that is something as well, that like it takes so long to master the grit, but when you do, I feel like it makes everything feel slightly easier. And this is where as well I'm considering that competition climbers will have such a leg up, in the sense that because instead of them refining like one style loads, they're really good at loads and loads of different styles to like such a high level that like they can just go outdoors and be like, oh well, this is really akin to like a comp slab. I think when Billy Rydell and Alex Waterhouse did the nose, they said that the most similar thing it was to the bottom sections of it were like comp slabs, with the way of like how small the feet were and how like delicate you had to be with your movement. And you can kind of sort of see it, to be fair, if you like think of some of the comp slabs that were set in the Olympics, which is probably the last comp I watched. I'm not particularly interested in competition climbing, but like the way that worked, I think is very like really interesting. I think as well, like we often see a lot of pros like hop from place to place, like going bouldering and putting up stuff. And I always think of like the yearly Swiss pilgrimage, and I think like, oh, why do people go to Switzerland? And yeah, I think the rock quality is one of them, like amazing rock quality, no doubt. But I think also to that, it's because the style is so transferable to the board. Like you can just train for 3 months, like you can just train for 9 months of a year, go out to Switzerland on 90 days of EU days, and just do really well there, because the style is so specific and so similar. And because of that, like the grades feel really hard, because you're like, oh, I've done 9 months of training and now I can do this, like it must be 80 plus. And it's like kind of the upper echelons of that like strength, and that's like really impressive. But then like for something like, I don't know, if you go to like Northumberland or Squamish, where I think there's one 8C plus now in Squamish, is Event Horizon, and then like the hardest thing in Northumberland is like 8B plus, or on the grit would be like 8B plus. You can take like it takes like a lifetime to master those like specific skills and those specific like skills of technique. But once you have them, they don't necessarily go away, and it makes things feel easier physically than they once were. But does that lifetime of mastering those sets of skills get represented fairly within a grade? I don't really know. I don't really think it does a lot of the time. I think it's interesting, because you like the climbs that are seen as soft, even within like the Peak District on the Gritstone, are often the ones that are more basic in like difficulty. Like it's just like, oh, pull really hard here, and the ones that are seen as like more sandbagged, for example, are the ones that are just generally harder to do, in the sense that the like specific skill is more difficult. I think it's interesting though, because, and I think the Squamish granite possibly lends itself towards this. Like in order to do these problems, you need to like have a go where you just hit everything correctly, regardless of how strong you are. Like, you have to get your heel in absolutely correct. You got to hit all these holes, so it's actually really difficult to repeat these problems. And does that get represented fairly in the grade? I don't know, like it's hard to say. I think so often we're moving towards a place in climbing where the movement element of it is being reduced as opposed to like how strong you have to be. It's like when you walk into climbing gyms now, like with when people think of climbing coaching, they think of like, oh shit, like I gotta get in the gym and stuff like that. And it's like, no, in order to become better at rock climbing, you simply have to go rock climbing. And I'm not saying that this training like won't help you. Like, yeah, obviously it will, but I don't think there's any coincidence that a majority of like the more new school, let's say like last 10 years, like all the best outdoor rock climbers are all guys who used to compete as kids or up until they're 18, and then were like, okay, fuck this, let's just do a load of rock climbing. Like Aidan Roberts, like competing indoors, Bozy, like indoors, Simon Lorenzi still does World Cups, Sean Rabatou, like used to do comps. Like all of these as kids, like had this huge like foundation of doing this like comp style well, I suppose less comp style movement than it was, but like just like learning perfectly how to move with their bodies and like adapting their style because of that. And even like the GOAT himself, right, like Ondra, like the way I'd say he's probably maybe the best moving climber in the world, at least sport climbing wise. Like Ondra is like you never really, like when you hear about his training, yeah, he like trains really hard, but I suppose it's like not the focal point of his climbing. Like when you think of like insane strength benchmarks, you probably think of somebody like Magos with his like insane fingers. But with Ondra, like I think, at least from my perspective, I don't think about that. I think about like his like the way he moves. Like when I think of Adam Ondra's like insane skill, I think of that clip on Silence where he's in that like crack section and his fucking body looks like it's fully dislocated. I think that's like the stark difference in a movement based climber and one that is just like really strong and like really can adapt themselves to it. And I think like we are like fully moving that way where like technique is becoming less of a focal point. It's like there's an old Dave Graham interview where he's talking about like being in like Sirana or something with Chris Sharma, and he's like, those guys are just way fucking stronger than me, but he can still do the routes because we associate like Dave Graham as being like the wizard now. Like the way he uses his body is unbelievable. Like that new, I think it's called like Celeste or something that he did fairly recently. I think he gave it 8C or 8C plus in Swiss. Like the knee bars on that were fucking insane. Like I think there are just boulders that some of these guys do that like nobody could repeat. I mean, it's why these boulders don't have repeats, right? It's like because their style is like unbelievable. And as well as that, like you look at guys like Nico Perlson, who's like notorious for fucking downgrading shit in font, and like yeah, I think it's quite funny and whatnot, but I think I have to think about Nico Perlson. It's like brother lives in font. I don't know if he actually does, but he does. He's done a fucking lot in font. He knows that like forest style like by the back of his hand, and because of that, like fucking everything feels easy to him. So like when Soudain Soul got put up and he just fucking went along and did it, like yeah, it probably felt fucking well easy to him because he just knows that forest like so unbelievably well, and like he knows how to move on those sorts of problems like so well. And I think like that is just not like represented within a grade like whatsoever. Like fair enough if these problems were like, okay, you've got to like hang on this 22mm edge for fucking 5 seconds, then like get your foot up and shit, like yeah, there would be like an inherent strength barrier to it. But I just think that like often physical ability is overshadowed by technical ability in its representation of the grade, and those skills are just really difficult to train. I think another element that is often, and I touched on this at the start of this episode, that just isn't represented like well, is like the way like conditions and strategy play on a boulder. And this is something I often think about. It's like, should we represent those things within a boulder? There's certain places in the world that to get boulders in conditions is insanely hard, like fucking insanely hard. I'm like, to the ones that come to mind is places like Scotland, Northumberland. It comes to mind. Where else just has like a fucking abysmal weather? I bet you Japan is probably pretty shit, like with the rain and like how humid it gets. Um, yeah, there's a few places where I can think that like the conditions would play such a huge perspective, and I don't think they should be represented in that. I mean, it's like it's interesting because like I think about stuff like the rail. It took him like 4 years to do the rail, and that was because it's this like it's in Northumberland, like it's a very like temperate climate over there, with the sense that like this is something that if it's in the sun you can't do. Like it needed to be a very specific day to do that, and these are like unbelievably friction dependent holds. Like, should the fact that it took him 4 years and to move his family, this is Varian I'm talking about here, move his family to Northumberland, should that be represented in the grade? I mean, I don't think so, but I can like perfectly understand the rationale of why. The reason I don't think so is because I think we're like leveling up in terms of strategy, which I suppose is sort of the antithesis to conditions, in the sense that like we're now bringing electric fans to the crag, like Makitas and whatnot. I'm about to go and buy a fucking portable heater for the winter on the grits because I'm tired of being cold and I want to have blood flow in my fingers and feet. And I think as that grows and as like crag strategy evolves, like you'll see these things go down because of innovation. And I also think that like that isn't like representative, right? Like fundamentally, yeah, genetics play a bit of it, but you still got to do a lot of training to be strong enough for these boulders. But if conditions are taken into account, you could just have one person who's incredibly fucking lucky and rocks up to the boulder for their second session one day and just gets like a fucking bluebird 10% humidity 10-degree day and just fucking like rinses up the boulder. And I think of that, and on like the walk-in front as well. There's a guy, Mo Beta. He does like Nova Scotia in Canada, or is it in America? One of the two. And he has like insane crag strategy actually. Like he's working this, I think it's called Ego Death Arret project. He's like, yeah, I've got a humidity measurer, I've got a heat gun, I've got a fucking like a leaf blower, all this shit he's brought to the crag. And he has like a dinghy, like a rib, like outboard motor on this boat that he like boats into the fucking crag with. He has like these electric bikes and stuff to get him to the crag faster. It's like shit like that. Like that can't be represented as well. And it's like Cedar Wright as well, I think, is pretty notorious for doing I don't know, even like paragliding into crags, which I can see if you're in like those Kyrgyzstani, is that the right term? Like big walls could be like a big differentiator of like getting to these places, because I can imagine it's probably harder if you've done a 6-day walk in to then like haul yourself up some fucking like 8B pitch on some big wall. Than it is if you just like got helicoptered or like paraglided in. So I think there is like a stern reason to why like that doesn't get represented in the grade very easily. I guess like next I kind of would like to touch on kind of like the different sort of grading systems we've got going. Firstly, I'm like a fucking French supremacist. That's the first time I'll ever say that about France. But I think that the French grading system works. It has like the right level of detail. It's pretty easy to understand. I think it sounds cooler than the Waco system. And I mean this for sport climbing and bouldering. I think that the Yosemite decimal system is like laughably bad. I don't understand what the fuck they're doing over there. I think for the scrambles, sure, but as soon as it gets to bolted sport climbs, the French system works. Like I think it's any wonder why a majority of people have the like Moonboard app in French, because it gives you that nice 7B plus and 6C grades that just add more like detail. And I actually often think that there's like a bit of that blurry patch between like like the low end of V8 up to like V9. I think that like having that 7B plus grade is quite nice. So yeah, I'm all for that. And obviously, in fact, the only grading system that is better is Eubanks. I like big up Eubanks. I think that actually does work quite well. It's so fucking simple. Like it's just like 1 to like 40 or something, just numbers. And I think that's pretty sick. Like I quite like that. Of course, then we also have the E grades. I think E grades are a fucking can of worms, man. I am actually a supporter of the E grade, I'll be honest, but I'm a supporter of the E grade in the UK. I think if you're exporting it, the fucking system falls apart. Interestingly enough, something to note is that originally E grades actually really existed in the UK before sport climbing grades, like bolted sport, which didn't really exist. So when Ben Moon did a statement, an 8A and Lower Pentruan, he actually gave it an E grade to begin with, even though it was bolted, which I do find quite interesting. That like it was like it predates that. And I think the problem is that, like, as others have touched on, E-grades weren't a system that were designed to expand this far. I think they've come to a point now where, like, I think, like, E11 and E12, even, like, E10 and 9, I think E8 is probably where it's trying to gap at. But, like, the compression at the top end has just become, like, insane. Just because of, like, I don't know. I think it just was never designed to, like, get to this point, I suppose. And I do not think the solution is E-grader at all. But I'd like to dedicate maybe more of like a longer episode to that. Maybe somebody that actually trad climbs could come on or tell me. I mean, I don't really ever trad climb. It sounds fucking terrifying, especially in this country. But yeah, there we go. Maybe Connor Herson. I'd like to maybe try. You know what? I'd like Connor Herson and I don't know, like Randall or Whitaker or Bransby to do like a pod with them and just try and explain to them E-grades. Maybe we'll adopt them for Yosemite. That'd be interesting. Give him Meltdown E4 would be probably about right. But yeah, I think like the different grading systems. And if it was up to me, I think if I was opening a gym tomorrow, I would do like a V grade system. But not call it V grades, call it like the G grades or something. Not like, the Gaskins grades, but I do that and just have it as like individual, like for the gym, and then maybe give like if the customers wanted it, like a really loose range that the climbs could be, and say like G1 or sorry, like I don't know, G4 could represent like like V2 to like V4.5 maybe, like just to give people that sort of like very loose recommendation, because then you get yourself out of the shit, don't you? Like, it removes like the irrelevant comparisons from gym to gym, and I think it often like makes people focus more on the quality of the problem as opposed to the grade. I don't think stripping back grades completely is like any form of solution, because that would be incredibly confusing for new people. I suppose when I go into a gym now, to be fair, like there are just things that even within lower grades that I just know I won't be able to do. Climbing Works does that to you quite a lot. They just set in a style that makes it, it's like, oh wow, like that just is nails, and it's like hard to train for. But yeah, I think it's fucking well confusing. And I suppose lastly, and the reason it gets like so much talk lately is because of the way I think often people's skill as a climber is completely denoted by their grade. When you think of like a dark horse, you don't think of somebody that has done things that are hard for the grade. You think of how fast it took them to do hard things, or how many hard things they have done. And I don't think that's a particularly constructive way of thinking about the skill of a climber. I know people that are incredibly strong and incredibly good at climbing, but their grade doesn't really like carry that across. I don't know, Tim Blake is a really good example. For a long time he had done like a load of 8Bs, and he's like a phenomenal climber, and he's done one 8B plus. Like, does that make him worse than somebody that's done like one limestone 8B plus? Like, I don't know, maybe not, but like I think often we get it twisted that the person who has done the most of a grade is the best climber, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. And unfortunately, because it's such a quick and easy and convenient way to display somebody's climbing skill, it's become like really favourable by brands. And I know often people say like, no, it's not, but like you only have to take a look at like a majority of these like athlete portfolios to have to see that like they're either like influencers creating a lot of content, or they've climbed like a high grade. You have like a lot of people with big money contracts because they did a high grade when they were young, or they had like a expectation of a high grade or a high performance for outdoor rock climbers. and I think that's like where the developers miss out quite often, which is a bit of a shame because I don't know, it's hard to do that, and I don't think like sponsorship should be tied to grades. I think I've listened to this guy called Nathan on the Careless Talk podcast, who's one of the guys that designs climbing shoes for Scarpa, and he, I think, put like a nice thing forward, and it was like, what's your speciality? Like, what can you offer to Scarpa and climbing? And I think that's like a really good way of putting it. Like, if that thing is like, oh, I'm really good at writing guidebooks, or I'm really good at like developing this place, or I'm really like going around and doing these next level projects. Yeah, they all have like tangible value, but I don't think the person that jumps from country to country doing the hardest things there is worth any less than the guy who's like doing every 8B plus in his state or something. Like, I think like that value shouldn't just be represented at the top end. It should be represented like throughout. And I think like I don't want it to get to that point where it's like the person who's at the top of the global leaderboard on climbing history gets paid the most money, because that doesn't really tell the full story, I don't think. And that would be like a real shame to take part in. And I think the other thing is just like how fucked a lot of the grading is in a lot of places. Like, you have new school places like Rocklands, where you have this like new school style, and a lot of like tourists come, and everything's like majorly graded because like the local scene isn't as developed. But you have like the local scenes that have existed for a long time, where that movement has been like absolutely refined and built, where you have lower graded things that are maybe harder for a tourist to come in and do. And I think like those things aren't equally represented very much, which, you know, is a bit of a shame. And I also like to mention like Gaskins, and the way the UK was inherently stuck at 8B plus 8C for quite some time because of the legacy that he left behind was a bit of a shame. And it would be a shame for somebody not to be supported because of that. And I think that would be like a real shame, like within climbing. But yeah, I think I've pretty much touched on everything I wanted to say. The only other thing was I have like a question. Somebody can explain to me how the crux of a sport route in terms of boulder grade represents the end product. I simply do not understand it. There's too many inconsistencies for my liking. So yeah, somebody messaged me on Instagram about that. Maybe there's like a formula like boulder maths we can get going. I hope to create another one of these soon. I don't really know. If you want to come on, let me know. Please don't kill me in the comments, and I will probably do some more backseat grading stuff soon as well. We've not really been on that for some time, but yeah. Thank you all very much for listening. I've been Matt, and goodbye.